Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Holzer, Dr. Kelly Holzer, and I'm here for my third lecture for British literature. And today I'll be talking about G.K. Chesterton and some Father Brown stories, two in particular. G.K. Chesterton provides a bridge from the fin de siècle detective fiction of Arthur Conan Doyle and C.L. Purkis to what we now call the golden age of crime writing, which is typically understood to have taken place between the First and Second World Wars. So I thought I'd give a little context for the Golden Age, and then I'll talk more specifically about G.K. Chesterton. All right, so around the same time that Dorothy Sayers published the first of three enormous volumes of the Omnibus of Crime in 1928, this is the first volume. It had over 50 detective and mystery stories in it. Right around that same time in 1928, the Detection Club was founded, and it was a club just for detective writers, and it included Agatha Christie, Nio Marsh, Dorothy Sayers, and G.K. Chesterton, among others. The bar was really high for club membership. There were 23 rules. One of which said that members had to have published at least 2 detective novels of admitted merit. And members of the detective club had to play fair with readers. In other words, they couldn't pull the murder out of thin air, which has signaled a shift in how crime writing happened in the 1920s and 30s. The members of the detective club were really keen to shake off the criticism that their books were too cozy. Nevertheless, they are very cozy. Dorothy Sayers' Omnibus of Crime has an introduction in it that really historicizes the genre, going back to Aesop's fables, even in terms of the sort of element of crime fiction. And she also outlines the plot devices that the writers inherited from Edgar Allan Poe, some of which are Edgar Allan Poe, of course, wrote The Murders of Rue Morgue, The Purloined Letter. So in his stories, they are pretty much considered the first official detective stories. They feature Dupin, the detective who is eccentric and brilliant. He has an admiring friend who chronicles their adventures and is much less intelligent. He invented the hermetically sealed room mystery, where there's a dead body found in a room and no one can figure out any entrance or exit from the room. There's no way to know how the body got there. He also invented the wrongly suspected man. So false suspects come from Edgar Allan Poe. The unexpected solution, the faulty police, the solution by the most obvious means. So in the Purloined Letter, of course, the letter is hidden in plain sight. And the formula of the most unlikely person being the criminal. So Golden Age detective fiction is actually pretty lighthearted and straightforward. And again, the American counterpart to this is noir, which is much grittier and dark. Golden Age detective fiction almost always is humorous and ends very well. It's characterized by a contract between the writer and the reader, where the writer will give the reader all the clues and it's up to the reader to put together the puzzle. These were stories that were frequently set in a remote English village or a comfortable English country house. They featured members of elite society, if not the aristocracy. And in fact, these are the basis for the Clue game. If anybody ever played Clue, this is the basis for that. The formula involves a closed environment, a limited number of suspects. The writers actually called what they were doing clue puzzles. Golden Age mysteries, the writers considered them games. According to Father Ronald Knox, a Catholic priest and theologian and detective fiction writer, Knox wrote that a detective story must have as its main interest the unraveling of a mystery whose elements are clearly presented to the reader at an early stage in the proceedings, and whose nature is such as to arouse curiosity, a curiosity which is gratified in the end. And Father Knox actually came up with 10 commandments for writing detective fiction. And some of these are pretty amusing. So first, he said the criminal has to be mentioned in the early part of the story. But it must not be anyone whose thoughts the reader has been allowed to know. The second, all supernatural agency is ruled out as a matter of course. So you can't have a deus ex machina. There's no supernatural explanations for the crime. It has to be rational, logical. Not more than one secret room or passage is allowable in these stories. No hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used. So you can't just make up a brand new weapon and throw it into your story. Nothing that needs a long scientific explanation at the end. Number 5 is curious. No Chinaman must figure in the story. And the best way I can explain this kind of explicit prejudice, my students are always shocked by this, right? And I have to sort of share with them a little bit about immigration history and the yellow peril and the sort of fear about Chinese people and the fact that in so many other parts of British culture, they villainized and demonized Chinese people as villains. And so it would be too obvious in a detective story to have a Chinese person as a villain because there was already such a racist stereotype about in the culture. And it's kind of like, I always tell them, it's a little bit like when I was growing up in the 1980s, all the movies had Russians as the bad guys. Do you guys remember when Russians were always the bad guys? And then in the 90s and the 2000s, it turned out to be people from Middle Eastern countries who were always the bad guys. And I like to joke about this. My husband is from Russia, and he also noticed this fact of American pop culture sort of villainizing Russian people in the 1980s. And every once in a while, we'll be watching a show and there will be a Russian villain, and he'll get very excited because he's like, oh yes, we're back. We are back as the bad guys. So I'm trying to explain it to my students in that way, right? That every culture has its group of people that they sort of they have various prejudices against, usually because of socio-historical relationships, political relationships. Number 6, no accident can help the detective, nor must he ever have an unaccountable intuition which proves to be right. So there has to be a rational method of deduction. Number 7, the detective himself must not commit the crime. Number 8, the detective is bound to declare any clues that he discovers. Number 9, the sidekick of the detective, the Watson character, cannot conceal from the reader any thoughts that pass through his mind. And the Watson character's intelligence must always be slightly below that of the average reader. And then finally, I love this one, twin brothers must not appear unless we have been duly prepared for them. So you can't just blame the twin brothers, right? That can't just be your solution. It has to be cleverer than that. So I'll just leave that up for a minute. So what is G.K. Chesterton's place in the Golden Age? Father Brown first appeared in 1910. And the stories that I'm going to discuss today are 2 of the very first stories that were published. The last Father Brown story was published in 1936. So Father Brown's career, Chesterton's writing career, obviously spanned the official years of the Golden Age of the 20s and 30s. There are 53 Father Brown stories. And so although Chesterton's detective fiction technically predated the Golden Age, he did live and write through it, and his early stories were extremely influential on the writers of the Golden Age. And Sayers and he were friends, so on. So this lecture is going to examine a couple of Chesterton's really brilliant stories and the moral theology behind Father Brown's detective work. So I'm going to switch PowerPoints now. I always make 2 smaller PowerPoints because I'm afraid if I have a really large PowerPoint, my computer will just explode or something. Maybe it won't, but okay. So here I'm going to start my next slideshow. Okay, a bit of G.K. Chesterton. I don't know if anybody is out there as a fan of a bit of Fry and Laurie, but that's what I was thinking of when I wrote this title. Chesterton wrote, "If there were no God, there would be no."
It's still on the first slideshow.
Is it?
You might have to stop sharing and then share again.
Good idea.
There we go.
Did that do it? Great. Okay. So a bit of G.K. Chesterton. So first I wanted to say a little bit about Chesterton himself. He's known for his wit. He's just a hilarious writer. He once wrote, "If there were no God, there would be no atheists." Now, of course, I'm going to stop sharing again and see if I can find it again. Let's try this one. I apologize for this. Okay. There we go. Can everyone see my new slide?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a caricature of Chesterton from Vanity Fair 1912. He was enormous. He was 6'4" and over 300 pounds. You can see in this picture that he's got his slippers, but only one of them is actually on his feet. He was notoriously absent-minded. Allegedly, his wife dressed him in a cape in order to make him look more respectable. He carried a gun and a sword stick, but he never used the weapons that he carried unless a man expressed the desire to commit suicide, and then he would offer to loan him the man his weapons. But he had this kind of dark sense of humor, but he also, you can see that he's really large. He suggested that one time that he was the politest man in all of England, because if he was on a bus, he could stand up and offer his seat to not one, but 3 ladies at a time. He frequently forgot where he was supposed to be. One time he hailed a taxi to take him to an address that was just across the street. Another time he sent a telegram to his wife saying that he was at the market. And then he said, "Where should I be?" And she telegrammed back, "He should be home." That's the love of his life, Frances Blogg. So he was born in 1874. He married Frances Blogg. They never had children. He primarily worked as a journalist. He also wrote social criticism. He wrote 100 novels, hundreds of poems. He wrote over 4,000 newspaper essays, including 30 years worth of weekly columns for the Illustrated London News, 13 years of weekly columns for the Daily News. He did a series of BBC radio broadcasts at the end of his life that were extremely popular. So he just was this sort of polemistic who kind of did everything and a lot of everything. Interestingly, he converted to Roman Catholicism in 1922. He wrote a lot of theology, sort of as a lay person theologian, including he wrote a book called St. Thomas Aquinas, the Dumb Ox. And I'll say more about Aquinas later in this presentation. Let's see. He died in 1936. He's buried at Westminster Cathedral, and Father Ronald Knox of the Detection Club, who wrote the 10 Commandments, was the person to give the sermon at his funeral. He was known as the Prince of Paradox. He used paradox and irony quite a lot in his writing. So he once wrote, the whole modern world has divided itself into conservatives and progressives. The business of progressives is to go on making mistakes. The business of the conservatives is to prevent the mistakes from being corrected. So it's kind of a double-edged insult to both sides, which is pretty characteristic of Chesterton. He was accused of authoritarianism. He, like Dorothy Sayers, has also been accused of being anti-Semitic, just by virtue of the ways that Jewish characters are represented in both of their stories, in extremely sort of stereotypical and caricature ways. An entire issue of the American Chesterton Society Journal was devoted to this debate over whether Chesterton was anti-Semitic or not. So there's a lot of ink has flown on the subject. He was I think he was an inherently conservative individual who wrote detective stories because he really believed that they were a legitimate form of art, but also that detective stories and crime fiction in general could do something for the common good, right? So he wrote an essay called A Defense of Detective Stories. He wrote this before he ever wrote a detective story. And here are some quotes from this essay. He said, "Not only is a detective story a perfectly legitimate form of art, but it has certain definite and real advantages as an agent of the public weal. Civilization is a universal good that the police force protects," is one of his ideas. By dealing with the unsleeping sentinels who guard the outposts of society, Detective fiction reminds us that we live in an armed camp, making war with a chaotic world, and that the criminals, the children of chaos, are nothing but the traitors within our gates. When the detective in a police romance stands alone and somewhat fatuously fearless amid the knives and fists of a thieves' kitchen, it does certainly serve to make us remember that it is the agent of social justice who is the original and poetic figure. So detectives are agents of social justice in Chesterton's configuration. And this, I would argue, this actually comes directly from his absolute reverence for Aquinas and Aquinas's reverence for Aristotle's firm belief that we are meant to live as members of a society. We are not meant to live in isolated from each other, and that it's a moral good to be an upstanding member of society. I'll say more about that when we get there. Okay, so the first story I wanted to talk about is called The Blue Cross. The Blue Cross was first published in 1910. It was even published in the Saturday Evening Post in 1910, in July. The Blue Cross introduces Father Brown as the country bumpkin who visits London from Essex. He's in London for a Eucharistic Congress of Roman Catholic priests. And he is carrying with him a holy relic, a blue gem-encrusted cross, which he is bringing to Westminster Cathedral for use in the Mass. He fumbles his umbrella. He tells everyone that he's carrying a very special package. So he's making it very obvious that he's got this fancy special thing with him. And he generally comes off as an idiot. So this story actually starts from the perspective of Valentine, who the BBC, so I did manage to watch some of the BBC show with my husband this week. And I noticed that in the BBC adaptation, they made Valentine into kind of the police officer, the local police officer who helps, but is always just kind of outdone by Father Brown. It's actually, Valentine actually only appears in two Father Brown stories. The first one is The Blue Cross, and the second story, The Secret Garden, in which Valentine himself is revealed as the murderer at the end of the story, and he commits suicide. So I'm not really sure why the BBC took that character and altered it so much, but this story starts off with Valentine as very much the Sherlock Holmes character. He is named as the greatest police detective in France. He has come to London specifically to locate and apprehend the greatest European thief, Flambeau. And Valentine's description owes a lot to Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. But the difference kind of stops there because Valentine's method is a lot more unconventional. And in the end, he is always a step behind Father Brown. So it's that sort of classic reversal of Father Brown looks like he's kind of dumb and doesn't know anything. And he's like this country bumpkin. And Valentine is this suave, highly intelligent, famous detective who he just can't see the whole picture the way Father Brown can. So Valentine is trying to pick up Flambeau's trail in London. He anticipates that Flambeau will attempt a crime during taking advantage of this, the priest convention, basically. And he starts walking around London, kind of waiting for serendipity. He's waiting for an accident to help him with his detection. And so he starts to notice that things are out of place. So first he goes to a cafe and he drinks a cup of coffee, and the sugar dispenser has been filled with salt instead of sugar. And the waiter tells him, oh, maybe it was the two Catholic priests who were in here earlier, pulling a prank. So when Valentine leaves that cafe, the waiter also tells him that one of the priests threw his bowl of soup at the wall, and you can see the stain of soup on the wall. The priests, so now we know that there's two priests walking around. One of them is Father Brown, the short guy with the umbrella, and the other one is this unknown priest who's visiting. Later we find out that it's Flambeau, and he's disguised as a priest. He's walking around London with Father Brown, and Flambeau is planning to steal the sacred relic of the cross from Father Brown. He's just waiting for his opportunity. Meanwhile, Father Brown continues to leave this trail behind him of petty crimes and nonsensical clues for the sleuth Valentine to follow. so that the police can actually arrest the criminal. So among other things, the priests walking around anger a curbside grocer by switching signs. They overturn a bushel of apples. At one point, Father Brown alters, they go to lunch at a restaurant and Father Brown alters the bill so that Flambeau, when he goes to pay, pays 4 times the amount that he actually owes. And when the waiter stops Father Brown and says, "You paid too much," Father Brown goes, "Oh, you know what? That'll just pay for the window then." And he takes a rock and he throws it at the window. He breaks a window in the restaurant. So he's resorting to vandalism to get Valentine's attention, right? So here's, obviously, these are pictures from the 2013 BBC adaptation of Father Brown. There's Flambeau, the thief, obviously breaking into a safe here. Okay, so Chesterton wrote an essay called A Defense of Nonsense. He really thought that the 20th century, early 20th century, was just a period of riddle and nonsense. And some of this was like fun play, but some of it sort of was a signal that modernity had some kind of lingering illness to it, right? So he's partly defending nonsense, but he's also partly pointing out that it's the sign of the times. So in the Blue Cross, Father Brown continues to commit these acts of nonsense and minor chaos in order to restore order to society. And so that's the paradox. That's one of the ways the paradox is working in the story. And I would argue there's a lot of other ways that paradox is working in the story, but that's one of the big ones, is that he sort of sows disorder in order to restore order. Okay, so here's a question I always like to ask my students, because this is a crime, but what kind of a crime is it? It seems to be a crime of property, but who owns a sacred relic? If the cross is stolen, who is the victim of the crime? The cross allegedly it's likely to be the property of a particular church, but it's also the property of the church. So it's communal property. And so the victim of the crime wouldn't just be, because the cross it has 2 kinds of value to it. It has monetary value, but it also has this sacred and personal value to it. So it's kind of interesting to ask my students to think, like, who is the victim of this crime? Who is Flambeau harming, right? Who is he harming in doing this crime? And by the end of the story, Father Brown reveals that he has actually substituted one brown parcel for another brown parcel and mailed the brown parcel with the actual relic off to Westminster while he's been walking around with Flambeau. So he outsmarts Flambeau. Flambeau doesn't get the cross. And Father Brown says, "I saved the cross, as the cross will always be saved. It is at Westminster by now," right? And so at that point, you understand that it's not just about the cross itself. It's a much bigger, as always, Father Brown stories have a much bigger moral to them. So this actually leads me to talk a little bit about St. Thomas Aquinas. Because like I said, Chesterton deeply admired St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologiae has a description of divine law and human law, and it differentiates between divine law and human law in a way that I think very much informs how Chesterton writes many of his stories, and especially the way the stories are resolved, not with the arrest of the criminal, but with the priest always trying to convert the criminal and get the criminal to confess his sins, right? So there's that play on words with confession as well. So normally we think of a police officer as the agent of human law. Police officers enforce human law, but Father Brown always has larger goals in mind when he's apprehending a criminal. And I would argue that we can read Father Brown as an agent of what St. Thomas Aquinas called natural law. So Aquinas distinguishes eternal law from natural law from human law. So eternal or divine law is eternal and unchanging. It's God's reason and God's conception of things. Natural law is how God's law pertains to humans. So natural law, it directs people to the path of virtue. At one point, Aquinas notes that natural law is like it's what gives us a conscience. It's the good angel on our shoulder that informs us what's right to do. Human law supplements natural law. Human law only acts in society. Natural law is something that's bigger, that we are born with it. So natural law is the basis for morality and politics. It's unchangeable. It resides in the hearts of humans. And it gives us basic morality. It gives us the basic idea of pursuing good, avoiding evil. We have natural inclinations that would guide us to do things like preserve human life, not harm anyone. Aquinas adds procreation and educating offspring to this list. He also says natural law is what prompts us to recognize the truth of God, to be part of society, and to pursue our nature, to pursue the perfection of our nature specifically. Aquinas notes that humans are rational creatures with free choice, unlike other animals. And so we can act against our nature. We can disobey. And conscience is the thing that helps us apply the moral principles of natural law to actual situations in the world. Importantly, Aquinas says that living in society is something that natural law directs us to do. It's a natural good to live in society. So you can see that the conception of a criminal here is someone who acts against society, against the common good. Living in society is an inclination that sets humans apart from other animals. I guess St. Thomas Aquinas didn't really know about meerkat manner, or he might have altered his conception here. Meerkat manner is the society of meerkats that lives together. It was it was on Animal Planet. It was an Animal Planet show. Living in society is necessary for the full perfection of human existence. It enables humans to develop in the direction of their moral nature, even more than having a family does. Living in society was seen as a greater good than having a family. Having a family was part of it, of course. Living in society promotes a life of virtue. It requires us to pursue education, industry. It requires us to do things like sacrifice for the common good, cooperate with others. The individual has the opportunity to place the common good over private good. And you can see that for Aquinas, as for Aristotle, this was the basis for legal justice. This is the notion of the common good. So human law is different. Human laws are essential to the maintenance of civilized society because natural law doesn't enforce itself. Human law is necessary to enforce the moral and political requirements of natural law that could otherwise go unheeded. So we know it's not right to harm others. We know it's not right to steal things. Human law enforces that in society because we can act against our nature. So natural law requires criminals to be punished. Human law is what specifies what those punishments will be. Human law can be flawed because the humans who make laws can be flawed. So sometimes human laws actually hinder the common good rather than promote it. Also, human law cannot actually reach a human's soul. And this is where I think we see the strongest influence on Chesterton's conception of Father Brown. Human law can coerce behavior, but it cannot change the man's heart. And this is why I think we always see Father Brown trying to change someone's heart rather than enforce a kind of punishment prompted by human law. Okay, so this is why I say that I think Father Brown is very much an agent for natural law or divine law, not so much an agent for human law. Valentine in the BBC series is the agent for human law. And in both Chesterton's original conception and in the BBC series, Valentine is deeply flawed. Okay. So we have this idea that divine law is timeless and unchanging, right? And at the end of the story, we see Father Brown and Flambeau on Hampstead Heath having a conversation. They're still both dressed as priests. Flambeau is angry that he's not going to make away with the Blue Cross. And Father Brown is trying to, he's still trying to convert Flambeau, right? He's still trying to save the man's soul. And Flambeau says, these laws that we have to follow here about, stealing, he says, what if there were other parts of the universe where these human laws didn't exist, right? If we were on the moon, in a society on the moon, we might have a different set of laws where I could actually have that Blue Cross that I wanted. And Father Brown just looks at him and says, reason and justice, and this is the quote on the slide, reason and justice grip the remotest and loneliest star. Look at those stars. Don't they look as if they were single diamonds and sapphires? Well, you can imagine any mad botany or geology you please. Think of forests as adamant with leaves of brilliance. Think the moon as a blue moon, a single elephantine sapphire. But don't fancy that all that frantic astronomy would make the smallest difference to the reason and justice of conduct. On plains of opal under cliffs cut out of pearl, you would still find a notice board, thou shalt not steal. So it's kind of a lovely sermon, right? This reminder that natural law is much bigger than us, much bigger than our culture, much bigger than our world. Natural law and divine law. Elsewhere in this story, Flambeau and Father Brown are described. We always get this kind of panoramic view of the scene that Chesterton is trying to describe, so that when they're running across Hampstead Heath, they are described as smaller than ants, right? And so in many places in the story, human beings are described on this small scale as nothing more significant than an insect against this backdrop of this much bigger space. And I think that that's Chesterton's way of continually reminding us that we are like a blip in the universe, frantically trying to keep order in our society with things like human law and overlooking the more important part of natural or divine law. So again, Father Brown here reminds Flambeau that divine law, the commandment against theft, is exactly the same everywhere in the universe. There is nowhere Flambeau can go where theft will not be against human nature and natural law. And right conduct is over and over again described as a rational choice in the world that Father Brown describes. There's nothing mystical about it. It's the most rational choice to follow your actual nature, the nature that God instilled in you. So that's the Blue Cross. I love that story. It's just a lovely story. Father Brown doesn't get Flambeau in this story, right? Flambeau, we don't really know what happens. He's given over to the hands of the police, and then the story ends. He comes up 2 stories later in The Queer Feet. So that's the next story that I want to talk about. The Queer Feet is also such an interesting story, and it again brings together Flambeau and Father Brown. This was published in 1910 in the Saturday Evening Post and in a British magazine called The Storyteller. Father Brown is at an exclusive hotel called the Vernon Hotel. He has been called there specifically because one of the waiters is dying, and he has been invited to administer the last rites to the waiter. So the waiter dies, and then Father Brown goes to the cloakroom, the coat check place actually, and he is sort of writing up this dead waiter's like last wishes, and that's when the story opens. That's the scene where the story opens. At this time, this very exclusive hotel is hosting a gentleman's club for their annual dinner party, and the gentleman's club is called the 12 True Fishermen. So I hope you already are getting a sense that there's irony here in this name, right? They are preparing to dine at the Vernon Hotel. They have multi-course meal planned. And every time they have this annual dinner, they bring with them a very special set of silverware that has pearls. It's in the shape of, the handles are in the shape of fish, and there's pearls on it. So I couldn't really find, obviously this is entirely fabricated, but the image that I've got here for you is an antique Tiffany sterling silver flatware service that you can purchase on Etsy for $23,000. That's what I've discovered. So just to give you a sense of what these gentlemen stand to lose here, right? And why does the Gentlemen's Club have an extremely expensive flatware service that they carry around with them anyway, right? Well, the fancy fish pattern silver service goes missing after the fish course. Where could it have gone? So this story offers a critique of society this society that allows elite members of a gentleman's club to dine at an exclusive hotel once a year. It's noted that there are 15 waiters employed at the hotel, and it would be easier to become a member of parliament than it would to get a job as a waiter in this hotel. So 15 waiters, and there's 12 gentlemen in the club having dinner. So that's a more servants to diners ratio. Like that's the level of service required here is such that almost every diner has one servant assigned to them. The society in the story is described as a plutocracy and an oligarchy. And Chesterton writes that it's an oligarchical society that has almost gone mad on good manners. The critique there being that the forms of good manners are more important than treating the downtrodden better, right? The aristocracy is described as completely useless. So these 12 gentlemen who are dining, right? The ironically named Gentlemen's Club evokes the 12 apostles. This is Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper. So these are Christ's fishers, appointed fishers of men, right? But the gentlemen in the Gentlemen's Club, they don't do anything, let alone try and save men's souls. They don't, as my students always point out, they certainly aren't fishermen. They're not catching the fish themselves, right? So they're not actual fishermen in the literal sense, nor are they Christian fishermen, right, in the biblical sense. And it says, Chesterton notes that this club had a vast number of ceremonies and observances, so all these empty forms, but it had no history, no object, no purpose for its existence. And that, Chesterton says, was where it was so very aristocratic. That's what makes it so aristocratic. It's completely useless, right? So the crime here, the crime hinges on the fact that the gentleman's fancy dress is the same as a waiter's costume, right? So when gentlemen dress up to go out, they wear a fancy black suit coat. And when waiters at fancy restaurants serve, they wear a fancy black coat. So Flambeau, our criminal, the thief, all he has to do is put on a fancy black coat. And when he's in the room where the gentlemen are, he pretends to be a waiter. And that's easy for him to do because one of the waiters just died and everyone expects there to be 15 waiters. And so Flambeau just steps in and becomes the 15th. When he's with the waiters, if he's walking around the hotel, he pretends to be one of the gentlemen. So this is the queer feat, right? The feet are queer because Father Brown is sitting in the cloakroom and he hears footsteps that are fast and light and then heavy and slow, and then fast and light and heavy and slow. And if we were here, if I was giving this talk to you in person, I would of course try to demonstrate that. My students always think that's hilarious when I try and demonstrate what we're supposed to hear. But it's this fast, slow alternation that Father Brown hears, and he's like, huh, that's so interesting. Why would one person be making two different kinds of footsteps? So he intercepts Flambeau in the cloakroom and says, hello, Flambeau, it is I, Father Brown, once again. I know that you have silverware in your pocket. Why don't you confess your sins to me, right? So that's the way the crime happens and the way Flambeau is apprehended. But I wanted to say a little more about this distinction that the story continually makes between the waiters and the aristocrats. The distinction is embodied. Class difference is embodied in the different ways that the gentleman diner and the waiter walk. So a gentleman diner walks with a sense of heavy entitlement. He has no reason to hurry. And a waiter is trained to be invisible and silent and out of the way and fast. You have to move fast as a waiter, right? So the steps, the class is embodied in the difference between the way a gentleman and a waiter walk. And Chesterton and Father Brown, I think, together are pointing out that there's a real problem in a society that has such distinctions, that embodies such distinctions. Because the waiters in the story are described as the unseen machinery that surrounds and supports the lives of the wealthy. And these wealthy men don't do anything, right? They're useless to society. I want to read part of the story where it describes this scene that you see in front of you. So this, I think that Chesterton is trying to recreate this exact scene. So in the Vernon Hotel, as has been remarked, there were 24 seats at the terrace table. Only 12 members of the club. Thus, they could occupy the terrace in the most luxurious style of all, being ranged along the inner side of the table with no one opposite, commanding an uninterrupted view of the garden, colors of which were still vivid, though evening was closing in somewhat luridly for that time of year. The chairman sat in the center of the line, and the vice president at the right-hand end of it. When the 12 guests first trooped into their seats, it was the custom, for some unknown reason, for all the 15 waiters to stand lining the wall like troops presenting arms to the king, while the fat proprietor stood and bowed to the club with radiant surprise, as if he had never heard of any of them before. But before the first chink of knife and fork, the army of retainers had vanished. Only the one or two required to collect and distribute the plates, darting about in deathly silence. So you can see Chesterton's playing with this image, and I always try to explain it to students that this is a very unnatural way to sit at a table. When you sit at a table intentionally for a dinner party, you sit around the table and you face each other to talk, right? And so it's unusual in the painting here, although it enables us to see all the participants in the dinner party. And it's unusual in the restaurant. And it's interesting that the gentlemen are all, it seems like they're more interested in looking out at the courtyard than they are at even interacting with each other, which again gives you this kind of like, why are they even there? What are they doing? Okay, so flambeau, and this is the moral of the story. This is, I think, one of the most lovely parts of the story. The gentlemen discover that their silver service has disappeared from under their nose, right? Flambeau has come in dressed as a waiter, removed everything, dropped all the dishes in the kitchen, put the silver in his coat pocket, and tried to run out through the coat room, because there's a window at the back of the coat room, and that's where Father Brown catches him. Father Brown gets the silverware back, and then one of the gentleman diners comes in and says, "Oh, hello, Father Brown, right? You know, thanks for getting our silverware back." And Father Brown says, Father Brown says, "Odd, isn't it, that a thief and a vagabond should repent when so many who are rich and secure remain hard and frivolous and without any fruit for God or man? You are the 12 true fishers, and there are all your silver fish. But he has made me a fisher of men." "Did you catch this man?" asked the colonel, frowning, again, reverting to human law, right? He wants human law to be pursued to its fullest in getting a criminal. And Father Brown looks at him and says, "Yes, I caught him with an unseen hook and an invisible line, which is long enough to let him wander to the ends of the earth and still to bring him back with a twitch upon the thread." So once again, you have this lovely image of the concerns of the criminal and the concerns of human law are puny in the face of this much bigger divine order, right? And Father Brown, as an agent of natural law, is trying to restore order in a much bigger context than the police would. This is Chesterton. He wrote a book on William Blake, the Romantic poet. And one of the things he was trying to write about was whether William Blake was a mystic. People always have argued that William Blake there's a mysticism to his poetry. And Chesterton wrote, "We all feel the riddle of the earth without anyone to point it out. Every stone or flower is a hieroglyph for which we have lost the key." This seems to be Chesterton's larger theological understanding, right? That all life is a sacred riddle that is connected to the incarnation, and all of us rise from the dead every morning to see that riddle again and to wonder. So basically, the mystery is that we're even here at all on this earth to live in a society, in the context of something much bigger and greater. So why does Father Brown appeal to us so much? It's over 100 years since Father Brown's inception. Writing about St. Thomas Aquinas, Chesterton says, quote, "It's the paradox of history that every generation is converted by the saint who contradicts it the most." I would argue that Father Brown was created in a historical period marked by madness, nonsense, and irrationality. He's the voice of the rationality of the church, working endlessly to convert the most mad members of society, the ones who go directly against social order with their lives of crime. And I can see why Father Brown appeals to us now, especially in 2020, when we want this happy, we would like a happy resolution to the mysteries that surround us. And I think that we yearn for agents of natural law. I don't think we yearn for agents of human law. I think we yearn for these agents like Father Brown, who remind us that there is a thing as natural law. So that's my talk. It's a little shorter than last week's, because I was hoping we could have conversation, or I'd love to hear more about what you all think about Father Brown, because I know you have maybe seen other adaptations. Or we can talk about the stories too. I'm sorry I didn't get them distributed to you on time for you to actually read them.
Well, I've seen Father Brown on the TV, the WHRO TV series a number of times. I didn't realize for a long time that Chesterton was the one that had written them. I knew mainly about Chesterton through the C.S. Lewis books and the Inkwells or whatever that all got together and so on.
Yes, the Inklings.
Yes, right. And I thought it was really interesting seeing him as a detective. Not sure I like his housekeeper too well, but she's kind of a funny character.
Mrs. McCarthy.
Beg pardon?
Is it Mrs. McCarthy?
Yes. And her hats and all.
Yeah.
I realize that's part of the time, but I thought the stories, they did a pretty good job with them on TV. I enjoyed watching them. And I've read some other Chesterton stories. I don't remember what they are right now, but I've always thought his stories were very good and interesting. And there used to be a long time ago a series, and I can't remember for the life of me who wrote it or what the priest's name was, but he was like in he was a priest, but he also solved mysteries, and the monastery or whatever was kind of out in the country, but it was sort of like Father Brown, but I don't remember the guy's name. But I thought the stories there were very good, and they were similar, except that he didn't live in a house per se. But you don't remember seeing him on TV a while back, do you?
Somebody mentioned him last week, and they said maybe it was the Cadmon series, the monk series.
Yeah, maybe that was it. But I like I like mysteries anyway. And I've read a lot of different mysteries, but and I'm reading a modern one now. Well, it's just more than, I've read 3 or 4 of them. Is by Elizabeth George, I think it is.
Yeah.
Books are like this, but they're good. Yeah, they're really good. They're more like psychological mysteries, but they always show a ugly underbelly side of London and of life, things I never even heard of before. And I mean, I'm not that, covered up or whatever, but I like the story itself, you know, the psychological things and so on in it. And it's really hard to find out, really think about who's going to be the bad guy in her stories too.
If you like Elizabeth George, you might like Louise Penny. Have you heard of Louise Penny?
Oh, yeah, she's the one in Canada, isn't it? Or the
Yes.
guy that she writes about is the one in Canada.
Right.
Yeah.
Inspector Gamache.
Yes,
Yes,
right, yeah.
I'm
yeah.
reading, I love Louise Penny. I'm reading one now. It's called Hell is Empty Because All the Devils Are Here.
Mm-hmm.
I just realized listening to what you said, she follows all of that.
Mm-hmm.
She must be excellent. I didn't realize she was so excellent. I feel like she is after hearing you and what those 10.
The 10 Commandments.
Mhm.
I think Louise Penny is a wonderful writer, and I think that she's a lot like Chesterton, because there's a lot of times there's like a bigger moral to the story. It's not just,
Yeah,
it's not just a
Yeah.
free crime that's getting exploited, right? There's always some bigger, more important message, I think.
yeah, I've read a couple of her books. I haven't read all of them and so on, but I have macular degeneration now, so I can't read anywhere near as fast as I used to read, but I still really like to read. And I don't know if you've ever read have you read Elizabeth George's books?
I read something by her. I can't remember what though.
No, I liked her earlier books better because
I
it
did too.
seems like the ones she writes now are so full of detail that it's like, can we please get to the mystery here? You know, she sets it all up ahead of time and so
It
on.
has changed. Something's changed.
Yeah, right. I'm not quite as fond of her books as I once was, but I still find them interesting. But the ones I like, Dorothy Sayers' books, I thought they were really good too.
I love Dorothy Sayers.
Yeah, yeah. And I liked Agatha Christie, and I can't even remember all the ones I've read, but I think mysteries are pretty interesting.
So tomorrow in my mystery class, I'm teaching the Number One Ladies Detective Agency.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, I've read those.
Alexander
Yeah,
Smith,
yeah.
We're starting that one tomorrow. We're gonna
Yeah.
read the whole book.
That's adorable and wonderful, those books.
Yeah, I've read
They're
most of it.
terrific,
And
yeah.
I like those better than the other books he's written.
Me
I've
too.
read some of the Philosophy Club or whatever, and I didn't like those nearly
Oh,
as
really?
well as I liked that one. Yeah.
Have you seen the HBO series? There's an HBO series.
Oh, no. What's it called?
The Number One Ladies Detective Agency.
Yeah.
They made it's just like 6 or 8 episodes. It's a short, I think they just did it over a year. It's great.
What is it? Is this a book or a TV show or?
The TV show. They adapted the books. They adapted the first book into a TV series.
Oh, what was
It
it
was-
called?
The Number One Ladies Detective Agency.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that one. Was it on WHRO?
It was on HBO, and then I think you
Oh.
can stream it now on Amazon and stuff.
Oh, I'll have to look for it then on Amazon.
You could probably get it from the library too. You could probably borrow it from the library.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be interesting.
It's so charming.
Oh, I bet it is.
Yeah,
The different
yeah.
people who
And
play.
Shirley, we have it on the round table real often because we had a couple of her books in our book review.
Oh, well, really? Oh, well, if you ever see it, Betsy, let me know. But that sounds like it would be very interesting to see also.
I remember liking it a lot just because it's so different. I don't know anything about Botswana.
No,
You know, one of the books I always want to read, but I can't get around to do it is the Maltese Falcon, which everybody talks about as being one of the great mysteries, beginning mysteries, I guess, in the 20s or whatever.
That's one of the earliest American in the noir
Right.
tradition.
Right,
Yeah. It's funny because at the same time that Dorothy Sayers was writing the introduction to the Omnibus of Crime and collecting all of the stories in those 3 volumes, Raymond Chandler wrote an essay right around the same time on the American side. called The Art of Detective Fiction. And he has a
Oh,
completely different take. His sort of summary of detective fiction
right,
is
yeah.
completely different from the one that Sarah's writes. It's so
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I think I read that a long time ago, but I'm not positive.
Mhm.
The one talking about the mysteries and how they're written and which ones were good ones and so on, and the art of writing mysteries and so on. I remember some of the first mysteries I really liked was The Thin Man on TV a long,
Yep.
long time ago. And I saw one not long ago, wasn't quite as good as I thought it was when I first saw them.
Do the young people today, are they interested in this type of learning about these books and these authors? It would be very different.
I think so.
I guess they have to be a certain type of mind. The kids would have to have.
So I teach a class almost once a year, and it's just a sophomore level literature class, and it just seeks to introduce people to British detective
Right.
fiction. And it's a lot of the same stuff that I've talked about with you.
Yeah.
And you know what they really get into. So when we do the Golden Age unit, and I show them the 10 Commandments, and I have them read Dorothy Sayers' essay, I have them work on teams to create their own clue puzzle. So they have to write a murder mystery together.
Oh,
And I give them a template, right? So I say, have a sleuth and give me a personality for the sleuth, and have a cast of characters who are related or know each other somehow, right? So it has to be a closed room. Characters know each other somehow. There has to be a dead body. There have to be red herrings and false suspects.
yeah.
And I give them a couple weeks to work on this together as groups.
They work together in groups, huh?
And then they present their mysteries to the class. And the class, as an audience, has to guess who did it.
They
And
killer was.
they get so into this activity. I did not expect them to. I thought they would. And even when I'm describing the activity to them when they start the class, and I say, okay, I know this doesn't. It sounds like it's going to be torture, but people love this activity, and they get really into it, and they come up with some
yeah.
creative. They really come up with creative clue puzzles and all these deceptions to get, to sort of lead you off in the wrong direction. And we just did they did these presentations last week, and I find myself saying things like, I am so proud of how creative you all are at murdering people.
Yeah,
They're basically coming up with ways to murder people and try and get away with it. And it's,
there's another one that I like that they had a lot on TV, and now I can't think of the name of it, but it shows him when he's young and he doesn't use his first name because he doesn't like his first name.
it's Endeavor.
Yes, right, yes. And I think those are clever, and I like those also.
We love the Inspector Lewis series.
Yeah, right. But when I was teaching school and kids had to do book reports, I never had them do just a regular straight book report. It either had to be like a play or like a treasure that was found or an old paper or anything I could think of to make it a lot more interesting for them to do the book report. And they really seemed to enjoy that because then I let them read it to the class and so on also. So that was a lot of fun having them do that. And some of the kids wrote pretty good ones.
Yeah, I was so impressed with some of my group's work. It was just incredible.
Oh yeah. It's always amazing what some of the kids can do if they put their mind to it.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're at 4 o'clock, so if anybody has any other questions before we wrap up for the day.
Who are we going to talk about next week?
This is my last lecture.
Oh goodness, really?
Well, come back.
Oh yes, come back.
If you want me to come back next year, maybe I'll do Dorothy Sayers.
Oh,
yeah.
I love her work.
Oh yes, I do too. Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting, and it has some neat fun parts in it, or not fun, but I just think they're really, really well written, and I really enjoy them.
She's a beautiful writer.
Yes.
Okay, so British Literature Creeps and Crimes Part 2 in 2021.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for doing this
Yes.
class with us. I know I've
Yeah.
My pleasure.
teachers
Thanks for having me.
information.
Yeah, when I was in college, literature was my favorite course.
Oh, good. I love to hear that.
Yeah, well, I had a teacher who was really hard, and as a freshman, we had his class on Saturday, but we never missed his class if we could help it. Because he was so good, you know?
A Saturday class sounds,
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
So, have a good
thank you, yes.